What's up, empowered advocates? We're back. It's 2020, and I can't even believe it. I feel like we were just freaking out about Y2K not that long ago. But we made it into the new year, so happy new year. And I am so excited to be kicking off this season. We have a ton of great content lined up for you, so you're not going to want to miss any of it. We will still continue releasing 2 episodes each month on the first Monday and third Monday of every month. And you're going to want to tune in because we're going to have a lot of giveaways, a lot of exciting content. We're going to be hearing from professionals in the pro-life movement, from authors, from people who are doing some really amazing things. And we want to keep hearing from you. So if you have certain things that you want to hear about, please send it in, message us, give us a call, shoot us an email. We'll give you all that info about how you can do that in the show notes. So welcome to the new year. It's going to be great. We're going to hit the ground running. Our first episode of the year, I have been looking forward to this for months. So if you're familiar, if you've been looking around on social media, you may have seen that a new book released in November of 2019, so just a few months ago. And this book is called Pro-Life Kids. It is a children's picture book, and it is amazing. So here's what happened. I found this book on social media, and I was a little skeptical. I was like, can this really be as good as it looks? I don't know. So I took the plunge and I ordered it and I read it. And guys, this book has been missing for so long. We so need a tool like this. And so today on this first episode of 2020, you get to hear from the author of this book, Bethany Bamberger. And I'm going to give you a little information about who she is. And then we're going to jump right into the episode. We're going to let you hear from her. So Bethany Bamberger is the co-founder and executive director of the Radiance Foundation, and she has been an educator for 2 decades. She's taught in public school, private schools, worked with thousands of children, youth, and adults, and she's now a homeschool mom to her 4 children, and she has both biological and adopted children. You can find out more about Bethany and her family by visiting theradiancefoundation.org. We're going to list all this information in the show notes. So thanks again, as always, for listening in, and let's get started. Let's hear what Bethany has to say about the new book, Pro-Life Kids. You're listening to The Empowered Advocate, a podcast from Greensboro Pregnancy Care Center. Welcome back, Empowered Advocate listeners. I'm so excited about this episode today. We've got with us Bethany Bamberger, and she is the author of the newest children's picture book, Pro-Life Kids. Bethany, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's an honor. I'm so glad to be with you guys.
Yeah, I was so thrilled when I got your email saying yes, that you would do it. I was like, oh, this is awesome. And as I was telling you earlier off camera, but for those of you listening, I picked up this book. I ordered it when I saw it online. It mentioned in an article, and I sat on my couch and I read it because my kids were in nap time. And I was like, oh, I'll just read it first before I read it to the kids. And I just started crying because it impacted me so much. So we're going to let Bethany tell us about the book today. And if you keep listening, there'll be some information later about a fun giveaway too. So Bethany, before we start talking specifically about the book, I'd just love to hear about how you got involved in the pro-life movement. Like, how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I love when people ask me about my journey because I really believe that when things hit home to us and we hear other people's journeys, we realize that our journeys are important too, and that we all come from different places and different walks of life and different backgrounds. And yet at the end of the day, we share something so precious in common, and that's we value life. So for many years, I was a teacher. That's my schooling, my undergrad, my graduate work. And then I taught in the schools for over a decade, and I've been a homeschooling mom now for more than a decade to both biological and adoptive children. And when I was younger, my mom, I remember being in my teens and standing outside of an abortion clinic holding a sign and being aware of what abortion was. And although we didn't speak about it very much at home, I knew when I was in my teens and ended up dealing with other friends of mine who were in positions and contemplating abortion, that I just knew that in my heart this was not the right thing to do, and began to really stand up and stand with them and encourage them to have courage, make a courageous parenting decision, and to overcome a lot of the fear. When I was in my late 20s, I found myself in an abusive relationship and pregnant. A lot of my colleagues encouraged me to abort. And I just knew that all those things that I thought I believed and said I believed, the rubber really hit the road, because I had to make a decision for myself. And I've shared this a few times, but back in February 2004, it was the first time I had an ultrasound with my first daughter, and she was 6 weeks old. There was a little piece of rice blinking. You know, those hearts are little and adorable. But I really had a defining moment with the Lord. I felt his heart just to take my heart and her heart and wrap it all up. That night, I went home to my house and read, opened up this old journal, and there it was, this Psalm 34:5, which says, I sought the Lord, he delivered me from all my fears. Those that look to him will be radiant, and their faces will never be covered with shame. So my oldest daughter is Radiance. And from that moment on, I thought, I'm going to be the woman I want her to be. Within a year, the Lord had sent me an amazing husband, which is the only daddy she's ever known, Ryan Bomberger. And just a few years into our marriage, we knew we were both very passionate about the abortion issue, but also about advocating for the life affirming option of adoption, and to come alongside mamas who were in crisis and really encourage them to parent. So we ended up starting our dream, which was the Radiance Foundation, which is predicated upon Psalm 34:5, which exchanges the shame that comes along with brokenness and gives you radiant glory in exchange. So my journey today has really been this lifelong journey of a concept that then became reality and then took root in my heart.
Well, that's beautiful. So tell me a little bit more about what the Radiance Foundation does. Like, what are some of the things that it's done in the past? Yeah.
So we have this cute little motto, which kind of helps make it easy: illuminate, educate, motivate. So our heart is to illuminate that every life has intrinsic value. It's irreplaceable, irrevocable, unique value. So we educate about a myriad of social issues in this context of God-given purpose. We talk about adoption advocacy and abortion in the industry, and we talk about fatherlessness and poverty and parenting and how all of these things are intertwined. The Lord has given us opportunities. We do multimedia presentations, we keynote about 55 a year, and that's college campuses, conferences, summits, churches, where we're able to really talk about these issues and talk about them from a biblical perspective, which is also a scientific perspective. Mm-hmm. And so our prayer is that people would be motivated to not just have knowledge or have faith, but use it to impact their sphere of influence.
That's really neat. And so it sounds like you speak to a wide variety of ages then. Would that be correct?
This is totally true. And it floors us even when we have board meetings and we're like, the Lord has us in, youth events, speaking with youth, and then on UN panels and congressional hearings, because at the end of the day, foundational truths resonate at every age and every stage of life.
And I think that's so encouraging to hear, because our culture today is really bombarding us with these perspectives that are very anti-life, and so addressing these really tough issues that you've mentioned, that's not a popular thing. I would imagine that not everyone is a big fan of you guys.
No, it's true. We love it when they are fans, but there are a lot of people that would prefer that we not be in existence. And we've dealt with everything from death threats and letters and, Ryan being smoke bombed on college campuses and being protested. And we even had to move once just to make sure that our family remained safe. But, I just know that courage, my husband says, courage doesn't need a crowd. It just needs a conscience. Mm-hmm. And so even when it's not popular, it's what God called us to do. And because we know with every fiber of our being that every human being was created with such incredible purpose, that for us to stay silent is really for us to shrink back from what God has called us to do. So I believe that every time people speak truth, somebody's going to have a fit about it, because there is an enemy that wants to silence truth. And I say truth with a capital T, because God's heart is what's coming out when we talk about these truths in the context of what's going on in our society. And it's very obvious when you see that we're in a society that touts a lie as truth, gives us counterfeit freedoms, and the end result is brokenness. That's why, as we stand up and we boldly take a place and say, no, when you understand truth and God's heart for identity, for parenting, for family, we end up seeing that the result isn't brokenness, it's freedom. And so it propels us to not be quiet.
I love that. Well, and I like how you mentioned that speaking about truth and being obedient to God, it causes some people to get angry about that. And that's so true. I think sometimes we think the opposite. We think, well, if I'm walking in obedience and I'm speaking things that are true, it should be a little easier along the way. And the opposite is true. I mean, we see that all over scripture. So
But you're so right. There's something in the heart. I don't know if it's because part of the American, dream is to live with lots of cars and homes and stuff. And so we think that success is defined by the ease of life.
Right.
And really, in the kingdom and throughout the scripture, we never see that God ever says we're going to live without adversity. He says you will face adversity, but while you're facing it, take hope and know that I have overcome the world.
I love that. So, on that note, let's talk about this book, because it's a very proactive way to get the pro life message out there, and especially to young children. I mean, children are our future. So, talk a little bit about where this book came from. How did you begin writing it, and what was the heart behind starting to put together a book for children?
Sure. So, I had shared with you off screen that my graduate work, my undergraduate work, all of that was in teaching. I went into 10 years of teaching, and then becoming a homeschool mom, and I have biological and adoptive children. So I really believe in empowering children from a very young age to stand up for what is right and for what is good. And children are naturally pro-life. And I believe that as adults, it should be at the forefront of our job to foster that natural inclination. And we must be intentional about creating a culture of life from a very young age, because really we're talking about a society that really ascribes to a broken worldview that is looking to reach our children at younger and younger ages. It is part of their agenda to start from pre-K, even before that, and indoctrinate our children with things that are lies. Lies like abortion is reproductive choice, my body, my choice, little things that are just creeping in to our curriculums at younger and younger ages. So it's my heart that we would empower children from a very young age to know and stand by what is true and what is right. And with my kids at home, I have adopted children, my husband's adopted. We have made it a mission in our home to create a culture of life, to have, I believe that it is completely possible to foster a culture within our homes that allows us to talk about very, very difficult social issues, the human rights issue of our day, which is abortion, age appropriately. So I had originally written the text of this book as a poem to share with my kids. Like, it was as simple as that. And as I was reading it out loud at a little family meeting we had, my husband and I looked at each other, and I was like, hey, I think this could be a text for a book. And just my background in teaching, I love children's literature. I believe that it is a powerful tool to talk about things that otherwise would be very difficult. So that was February of this past year. And so we worked on really turning it into what it is today. And the Lord connected us with Ed Kaler, who's an amazing illustrator, and really brought it to life, because it's not a character-centered book, it's a concept-centered book. And so I was passionate about having the illustrations be just as powerful as the text. And I wanted children to see a reflection of themselves in the imagery in this book. Because speaking about being a pro-life child isn't just something that I want them to think about other kids, something other people do. I wanted it to be personal, and I wanted them to feel a sense of personal responsibility from a very young age.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting that you said it was really important to you to have the illustrations communicate the power of the text, and it does that so well. And I think that's a hard thing to do with children's books. I mean, there's some children's books I've read that I'm like, this could have been great, but I'm not feeling the illustrator, or vice versa. And so they kind of work as a team. And I just love that you see all different kinds of children in this book. I mean, children with different skin tones and with different abilities, and all sorts of things represented. And so you mentioned that children are born pro-life, but it sounds like what you're saying is, although they're born pro-life, they won't remain that way unless we speak truth into
Right.
them. I think that's so powerful.
I believe that sometimes we think, as Christian pro-lifers, or just as pro-life adults in general, that we're protecting our children to not speak about this issue, when I think that it's time that we replace the fear of talking about something hard with a tool that allows you to articulate some very hard issues. We are losing the battle from the get-go if we don't understand what it means to empower our children and speak about these issues age appropriately, in a fashion that's done. You don't have to get into all of the nitty gritty. That's the beauty of this book as well. It's a catalyst. If you would like to speak into this issue and talk about it more graphically and more detailed, if you have an older child, and if you don't, and you have a younger child and you just want them to begin to understand this issue, it's fantastic. Because honestly, if you have to teach a child that it's okay to dismember another human being. Right. That is not something that they are born with. It is not in their heart to do. But yet there's an industry that has worked very hard to redefine what abortion is and call it something safe and wonderful. And so there's an indoctrination that's really changing something that at the core of human beings we know is not right.
Well, and that brings up something interesting. So I'm sure you're familiar with last year, the beginning of 2019, the founder of Shout Your Abortion movement, so Amelia Bono, she went on this YouTube show called Kids Meet, and it was Kids Meet Someone Who's Had an Abortion. And it got a ton of traffic, and not all of it positive, because she was talking to these kids and really normalizing abortion. And anyway, when that video came out, she also mentioned that they had in the works a children's book that they were planning to put out that was pro-abortion in 2020. And I've done some looking. I haven't found anything new on that, but it did get me thinking when I saw this book come out. I was like, oh, that is perfect timing, because there's this other book probably coming. What are your thoughts on that? Was this book kind of in response to that a little bit, or what was your thoughts on
I actually love that you've brought this up, because I've been bringing this up in interviews in the last few weeks, because most people didn't know about that. I mean, I know that there are many, because we know, like you said, that those Facebook videos pretty much went viral, and it was that didn't play into that one in particular, didn't play into me writing this book. But you are exactly right in saying that there is a pointed agenda. There is a very specific desire for pro-abortion folks to go after our children. Yes, to have a young child, sit in a folding chair next to a woman who's talking about her abortion in order to normalize it is frightening to me. But there are many books. There's Feminist Baby, which is on the shelf in Target, which talks about, just these underpinnings of what I call fake feminism, not true feminism, and reproductive justice and my body, my choice types of concepts being preached to little kids. A board book. I mean, it's a board book, so it's for littles. And Sister Apple, Sister Pig is another book that's written that is talking. It's a father sharing with a child about the normalizing the fact that the mother had an abortion. And so the child is asking all these very normal questions, and the father is essentially saying, well, we didn't have the money, and mommy would have been really sad if we had more children. So now your sibling is a ghost. So you're right. I find it interesting when folks are kind of like, I don't think that those pro-life kids books should be out on shelves because it's too early. Well, while we're over here worrying about that, there's an entire group of individuals that are working very hard to get to our kids at younger and younger ages. I used to be a teacher in a middle school. I've taught many different grades: first grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. I taught in Philly for a number of years, seventh and eighth grade, and Planned Parenthood would come to our classrooms. They'd be in our classrooms. They'd come by and they'd say, do you have any girls that need counseling? And if they were pregnant, they'd leave pregnant and come back not pregnant. There is a huge presence of especially Planned Parenthood and their quote unquote, I put it in quotes again, because comprehensive sex education is not what they do, although they call it that. This has a huge place, especially in public schools. And so, yes, there are these books out, and there continue to be books like this out. And that's why I'm saying, let's rally. Pro-lifers, let's rally. Let's stop being fearful about broaching this issue with our kids, and let's do it right. Let's do it age appropriately. And let's get the tools to the mamas, the teachers, the Sunday school teachers, the aunts, the uncles, to combat this, because honestly, we have to teach our kids before a broken world reaches our kids.
Right. And I love how you call this a tool because, you talk about not being fearful, and going off that too, we have the truth behind us, right? We have the truth of scripture. We have the truth of science. And so, scripture says that if God's for us, who can be against us? So there's no reason to be fearful, but you're right. It creeps in. And I think it's because these things like, those videos we were talking about, those other books, the Planned Parenthood, they're so huge and they seem like these insurmountable giants. And so that brings up another question. And I've experienced a little bit of this because I do a lot of writing about abortion too. And I've written a little bit about talking with kids about abortion. And I've received some feedback that kind of communicates a hesitancy to broach this tough subject with children. A hesitancy to encourage them to maybe pray outside an abortion facility, just to expose them to something that is quite horrific. So what would you say to the person who is pro-life and who agrees, yes, abortion is wrong and we should stand against it, but who thinks that maybe we should hold off for a while? It's just too heavy to put on young children. We should hold off until they're older. What would you say to that?
Well, I would like to preface it by saying that too often Christians are staying silent while we have a culture that's shouting the lie to them. And as much as it is our heart to shelter and to keep children in a place of not knowing and protect their innocence, there's a balance. As a parent, God has given each parent the right to determine what they feel is appropriate for their children, how to bring that up. And, I'm not going to say to a parent who's feeling fearful about speaking about abortion with their children that, hey, hands down, you should be pulling out pictures and they should go full on. I'm saying stop and really search your heart. Is the fear that you're feeling something that God is putting in your heart? Or are you needing to lay that down and you need to say, listen, this is the human rights injustice of our day. And we cannot remain silent. We have to raise our voice. We have to pour truth into our children so that they will have a standard by which to weigh all of the lies that are coming at them. And so often, not always, but often the fear of speaking into some of these things turns out to be like, I'll do it when they turn 11, I'll do it when they turn 12. And before you know it, I'm standing with your kid in high school having a full on debate about things that actually the parents would be mortified to know that their children are beginning to believe.
Mm.
I think we're in a time when technology and television, the bombarding of information is overwhelming. And we cannot listen. The Bible doesn't say we're not going to face fear. It says, it says, when you face fear, be reminded that I did not give you the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind, a sane mind, a peaceful mind. And I think that we as adults need to just look at ourselves and say, what is it that we're fearing most? And there's so many ways to begin to fashion a child's heart for the things of God from a very young age that we don't have to be scared off before we engage in these things.
Yeah, that's really good. And I like how you mentioned that you've mentioned the word culture, but it's an ongoing lifestyle, it's an ongoing conversation with our children. And I think that's huge. One thing we say a lot at our house is if you ever have any questions about what mommy does at the pregnancy center, or any questions about why mommy's going, outside the abortion facility today, ask us. So trying to keep it open ended, I think it creates that atmosphere of safety for them, which is so huge. So in your book, one thing I love is a couple of illustrations where it alludes to times in our history where life has not been valued. So you see an illustration depicting the Holocaust, and then you see another one depicting slavery. And these are very heavy issues. So what are some tips or pointers that you might give to parents who, as they're reading this might spur more questions from their children? Well, what was that? What was that about? Why were those people standing there like that? What are maybe some ways they could kind of introduce these topics in age-appropriate ways?
I do know after all of my years teaching that in the classrooms across America, from pre-K on, and in public libraries and in school libraries, there are many books that talk about these issues, the issue of slavery, the issue of Holocaust. And so it's something that there are so many tools to talk about what happened during these periods of time. When I speak to my children, I break it down like this. Anytime there's a group of humans that does not consider another group of humans to be human, it has never ended well. Slavery and the Holocaust are both times that we've watched it play from beginning to end in history. And so as we look back to these points in history, we see when Black people were not considered humans, even though they're human, and what happened with that. And they were considered property, and how that affected them individually and as a society, and why there was a civil war because of that. When we look at the Holocaust, we see that one group of humans decided that another group of humans was not worthy and not human enough. And so therefore, they wiped out almost 11 million humans. You see, it's the same evil pseudoscience of eugenics, which says that we can erase or purify a civilization by erasing some people. That science is what motivated these different events in history. And that is the exact same science that motivated what we're seeing now as the abortion industry today. It says because of the size, because of the level of development, because of the location of where this child is living, we are one group of humans declaring that another group of humans is not humans and their life can be taken. And so it's very important that we have an opportunity to say, hey, look back at history. We've seen how this has turned out. And in those moments when we say, thank you, Lord, for the abolitionists who stood up for what was right and what was good. White abolitionists, men, women who said no. Saying that a Black person is not human or 3/5 a person is not okay. It is never okay for the individual, and it ultimately is never okay for the society. I think it was actually incredibly important for me to add those pages because I think it really ties in with what children are used to hearing. It's part of the curriculums across the globe. I mean, even if you're homeschooled or private school, I said public school, but really just the curriculums are speaking about these incredible times of history where we needed to stop a behavior, an action, a practice, and we need to say, hold on, humanity matters, and this needs to change.
That's good. And I like how you draw the connection between now. I think that's the huge point. Like what happened then, it's happening again because of that core aspect of humanity not being valued. That's so good. I think that's real helpful for parents listening. I know I'm going to use that. That's really good. So overall, what's been the response to this book so far?
Oh my goodness. So we thought we would do a soft launch in November during Adoption Awareness Month because that's really close to our hearts. And we launched and literally sold out of our first print in 2.5 days.
Wow.
So since then, it is going for the third run on printing. The response has been incredible. We have gotten orders from all over the United States. And then we had to make sure that our site worked for international, New Zealand and Italy and Dubai, British Columbia. The response has been phenomenal. And we have a spot on our website, which I encourage you to go to and share the story you shared, and anybody else who's listening that gets the book. It says, tell your story. When you share through the website, it gives us permission to share how things worked out with you. We have gotten amazing imagery, pictures, videos of mamas who are reading this to their kiddos, folks that have decided to buy it for their school libraries. And it has been an overwhelmingly positive response because I think it resonates with the hearts of people who are pro-life and have been looking for this type of tool.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like this is a huge felt need. And it's funny because the media wants to say that most people are pro choice. But man, you look around, everyone's looking for a way to verbalize the value of life. And so this is just a great tool for that. Have you had any negative feedback so far from the
Other
opposition?
than a few who have emailed about how dare you talk to kids about slavery and make that about abortion. It will be interesting because in the next 6 months to a year or so, we will see what happens as folks begin to attempt to put this in their public schools and in their public libraries. I can imagine just from history and our own history at Radiance Foundation that there will be backlash. However, I will say, however many weeks we are into this, 4 or 5 weeks, it has been an absolute overabundance of positive response, and radio shows and the articles and the folks that have picked it up have been incredibly positive. So I will drink that in. We will allow that to encourage us to keep moving forward, but we know better than to think that this is the end of, that there's not going to be any negative backlash.
Right.
There always, like I said earlier, wherever there's truth spoken, there's a lie that will fight against it. But that's okay.
That's good. You've got our support.
Yes, that's wonderful.
That's great. Well, we've talked a lot about children and the importance of presenting truth to them. But what messages does this book have for adults? Is there a message for adults? Have you heard any feedback on that? What would you say?
Well, I moved that you even shared that, even when you read it, you just sat there and there was a God response, an emotional response. And I believe, I've said that I've taught for many years in different age groups. And I will tell you, there were times that I would close the door of my math class and read a picture book to my big, tall 8th grade guys. It's funny, they would come in 5th and 6th grade looking like little peanuts. By 8th grade, I'm like, You're like a grown man. And you read them something and it resonates with their soul, and it is a jump off for some really deep, really powerful conversations. So, this is what I'm praying this will continue to do for adults. I've had many personal emails that have been sent to me that just warm my heart because, like you've mentioned, and like we're talking about here, adults that are saying, wow, this is speaking to my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day, the bottom line is humans care about other humans. We have something in our heart that resonates when we hear about an injustice, when we hear about somebody in our community where they've been wronged. There's an outcry, there's an uprising that comes in our hearts. There's this thing that's in all humanity that when they see an injustice, they sit up straighter and they say, what are we going to do? And no matter how it's presented, abortion is an injustice. It is something that needs to be addressed. And so I believe that even adults feel that resonating as they read this.
Yeah, I think it was C.S. Lewis who said that a children's book that can only be enjoyed by children is not a good children's book. And that I love that, 'cause just the idea that whether you're young or old, a story, truth resonates with people, just like you were saying. And it's funny, as I was reading it that first time, my husband was sitting across the room from me, and I was going through and I was like, oh my gosh, Matt, this is SLED. This is like the SLED argument. And you mentioned it already, the using size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency, those things, that's that argument, how to defend the pro-life position. But when I realized that essentially this argument or this defense was in an easy to read format that rhymes and everything, I was like, this is going to resonate with a lot of people. And as we were reading, as I shared with you before, but for those listening, I brought this book into our staff meeting and they asked me to read it. So I stood up in front. We had like story time with Mary, and I went through and read it, and everyone was so engaged. And one of our staff members said afterwards, he said, I would love to take this to some of my meetings with community partners because I think it'll help them get it. Like, because it just communicates it in such a clear way. So I know we've been blessed by that here at Greensboro Pregnancy Care Center. So it's very exciting. Well, one thing that is on the Pro-Life Kids website that you've said is that Pro-Life Kids is not just a book, but it's a movement. So as we close our time together, talk a little bit about what you mean by that. How is this book part of a movement?
I do. I say that Pro-Life Kids is not just a book, it's a movement. Every movement needs a catalyst. It needs something that's going to spark it into existence. So it is really our heart that this book would be a catalyst for a movement, just an awakening of the hearts of both adults and children to understand the importance of bringing our children in to this discussion, because the result of abortions on college campuses and throughout high school, we can change those numbers if we start at the beginning. And if there's such a beauty in the innocence of a child. And so when you talk about a movement, my heart is that this would be something that becomes a natural outflow, that it is not something that is second guessed by teachers and adults, but we would begin to expect that our children be empowered at younger and younger ages, because they will shift culture. They are the legacy that we are leaving behind. We will fight for as long as we're here. We will be in this, but there is something very profound about allowing there to be a movement, something that will have traction and move forward, and will outlive us as moms, as parents, as adults, and bring a shift in the culture.
That's good. Couldn't have said it better. Well, Bethany, for those who are listening and they're saying, I got to get this book now, where can they go to get it and to maybe get some other things too?
Awesome. Please visit us at prolifekids.com. That's prolifekids.com. There are t-shirts, there's downloadable worksheets. There will be more forthcoming as the new year goes. Each month we have some different things to roll out with it. It is currently sold out on Amazon, but in the next week and a half or so, they should be all back in stock. So that's another easy way to get the book.
Great. Well, wonderful. Bethany, thank you so much for your time and just for talking through this book with us. It's blessed me, and I'm just excited to see where it goes in the future. I'll be watching you guys. Those of you listening, you can also follow Bethany on social media. Where are the best ways? What are your handles? Yeah.
So the best way to do it on social media is to find us on Instagram and Facebook at Radiance Foundation. It's Radiance Foundation. And Twitter, Life Has Purpose. Although Twitter doesn't like us very much, so we've been shadow banned. But you could still find us there and go through all the sludge and find us, because we are there, even though they try to silence us. But you can find us for sure on Facebook and for sure on Instagram. And it was just an honor to be with you guys. And I just want to say, for the record, thank you for what you do. We are each just a different piece of the puzzle, and we can't do what you do, and you can't do what we do. We all have to do what God has called us to do. So thank you. Thank you for being on the front lines.
Well, thank you. It's a blessing to know that we're all on the same team, and that we can celebrate each other's victories and support one another. So for those of you listening, if you'll look in the show notes, I'll list all of that information we talked about, the website, the social media handles, and we'll also include some information about how you can win some cool giveaways. So Empowered Advocates, thanks for listening, and tune back in a few weeks, and we'll be coming at you with a new episode. Thanks so much. Thank you, Bethany.
Awesome. Take care.